Well, hi, good morning. My name is Ian Robertson. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority. Welcome to another Waterside Chat. And today I'm joined by Steve Hnatko with Tymac. Steve, we've been looking forward to having this conversation, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, specifically the Esquimalt Nation and the Songhees Nation, whose relationship to the land and harbor continue to this day. We're very proud and honored that they are on our board and have been since the organization was conceived back in 2002. So I'm joined with Steve Hnatko. Steve is the Vice President and General Manager of Tymac. Just to let everybody know that if you've got any questions for Steve or for myself, please use the Q&A function and we'll kind of get to those as we move along. But Steve, welcome. Thank you for taking the time. Maybe you could just start off and give us an introduction, kind of where you grew up, favorite hockey team, and tell us a little bit more about Timac.
Okay, thanks, Ian, and thank you guys for having me today. So I work for a company called Tymac. We are a marine logistics and transportation company. We are headquartered in Vancouver. We have multiple locations throughout the province, two main offices, Vancouver and Victoria, and we service all cargo ships, cruise ships, anything that floats throughout the province of British Columbia. So Victoria, Nanaimo, Prince Rupert, Port Alberni, everywhere, everywhere that provides support, we support them. I grew up, or I was born in Edmonton, so I'm an Edmonton Oilers fan. I know I'm going to get a couple boos from that, but grew up Albertan, born and raised. Currently live in Vancouver, and then I'll commute back and forth between the different locations, kind of as needed.
How did you get started? I mean, what got you into this business?
So my background is it's in consulting. It was consulting and training, and I kind of stumbled into the role. They were looking for somebody a couple of years ago to modernize some of the technology and stuff with the business. So that's how I originally got involved with them. Moved from a training consulting role internally to sales, and now more of a management role, overseeing the whole operation for the province.
All right, fantastic. All right, well, let's talk now a bit more about what Tymac does in the area of waste management and crews in Victoria, and maybe tell us about Tymac, and the relationship that you have with Victoria and where crews fits in.
Sure. So we've been managing cruise waste for all cruise lines that have come into the province since they originally started coming in. So back in the 80s, especially around Expo. I guess taking a step back on Tymac. Tymac's been around for a very long time. Established in 1929. Originally, it was designed, or it was created to shuttle people to and from different labor camps within the Vancouver Harbor, kind of up the strait. And over time, we kind of grew. We added more boats to the fleet. Launches is what we call them, little 12-passenger launched aluminum boats. Eventually started adding some tugs. And then when the cruise ships started coming in, there was a need, obviously, to support them from the waterside. In Vancouver, a lot of the terminals, they don't have space dockside to do any kind of services. So a lot of time it has to be done waterside. And we kind of found ourselves in this nice little niche where we're able to support waterside. We have smaller barges, we have smaller tugs. We could go alongside and start removing their waste. Now it's changed a lot from the way it was back then, where it used to be just a single bin, everything went into the bin and everything went to the landfill. And kind of the way that we've adapted and adjusted to, just because we've been doing it for so long, is we've really taken a focus on how can we reduce our impact. And that's kind of one of the ways we try to differentiate ourselves across a lot of the other organizations that do similar things to us, provide service to different cargo ships, to different terminals, to different cruise lines, is, how can we divert as much as we can from the landfills? So over time, we've put different processes in place. Now, if a new line, for instance, is coming into the province that has never been here before, because BC has such strict regulation, environmental rules, typically we'll have that person, our environmental manager, will sail with the vessel and provide them detailed instructions on, how things should be done within the province, how we like to receive things, because ultimately we don't want to have to handle it more than we have to. We want to be able to take it, single commodities, to the final recycling facility or wherever the products need to go. Um, for Victoria, we came into Victoria 3 years ago. There was a previous company that had been doing it since Victoria started seeing cruise ships. So they were receiving the waste and everything else right from the beginning. We came in, 4 years ago, I guess it is now. It's kind of hard with COVID because we haven't seen ships, and I guess it'll be 2 years this year.
Yeah.
But we came in, and the reason why we partnered with all the cruise lines is they had asked us to come in to Victoria is because they liked what we were doing in the other ports, and they wanted that same process to be mimicked across all ports that they called within British Columbia, just to kind of streamline it and make it easier for them. So the same way that we're asking for stuff to be landed ashore in Vancouver is the same way we'd be doing it in Vancouver or in Victoria, Prince Rupert, Nanaimo, etc.
So, and also just to kind of clear this up, it's Tymac that has the contractual relationship with the cruise lines, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with GVHA or
Yeah.
Port of Vancouver or Port of Nanaimo. We contract directly with the cruise lines. All services are done directly with the cruise lines. They pay us for all services rendered. Taxpayer really isn't involved at all in any form of the sense. It's just a private business relationship between the two entities.
Got it. And you talked about just sort of the start of Tymac. Do you service other vessels, other vessels besides cruise, or is cruise your focus?
We do. So we act as the port reception facility for Vancouver in particular. So any vessel that comes in that needs any type of service, whether it's providing fresh water to the vessel while they're at anchor, or taking off any kind of recycling or garbage or used paint cans or anything that they have just for the basic maintenance of the ship, we provide all those services as well, including taking lube oils to them if they need new lubricants for their engines. We do all of that.
Okay.
So cruise is a big part of what we do, but it's not the only thing that we do.
Okay. Let's talk a bit more about Victoria, and why do the lines choose ports in BC, including Victoria, rather than ports up in Alaska or Seattle, which is their home port for the ships that come into Victoria?
I think there's two main parts. One, from an infrastructure standpoint, BC is very, very well positioned, both being obviously port cities. So a lot of the goods that we can bring in, they already have recycling infrastructure in place, and a very good recycling infrastructure in place where we can divert a lot of these things, produce new products, and because we're a port town, we can ship it to whatever other destination. When you go into ports like Alaska, they're very limited on what they can do there. It is quite remote. So if they have to land something ashore, it's quite complicated on how you're going to bring it to a facility for end of use or some sort of diversion practice. And we've been doing it for so long now with a lot of these cruise lines that from both sides of it, we've built up the I guess the recycling segments where they needed more support, and now we're able to support all around any kind of waste or item that we receive off the ships. We will typically have somewhere or something that we can do with it to make sure that it does not see a landfill.
Okay. Now on that, you were sharing with me when we were chatting about this a couple of days ago, you were sharing with me some really interesting, statistics around the average number of kgs that the average BC resident generates, the average Victoria resident. And then I was really interested about the comparison to what an average passenger on board a cruise line generates. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the average person in BC, and this is all published numbers, the average person in BC will produce about 1.5 kilograms of waste a day per person, every single person in the province. Victoria itself, the region is actually, it's quite a bit better. They're producing about 1 kilo of waste per day, and this is based off the 2019 CRD numbers. Cruise line, so in that same year, in 2019, what we were seeing is 0.27 of a kilo per cruise passengers was what being landed ashore. So we were about 1/3, a little bit less than 1/3 of what the average person in Victoria was landing. As well as, you compare it to the province, we're 20% of what the average person in BC is landing. Now, also remember that they're on these lines, or they're on these voyages typically for 5, 7, 10, 14 days. So it's quite incredible that they're only producing that much waste, and there's that much segregation going on board, with the actual waste being landed to shore is significantly less than what the average person is producing in BC.
Yeah, and just for clarity, when you talk about waste, you're talking about waste that's going to landfill. You're not That's separate from what's being recycled, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it fair to say, and again, is it fair to say, what would be your speculation, or what would be your understanding of why it's much less for crews than it is for the average Victoria resident?
A lot of the cruise lines do a very, very good job educating while on board. So everything from point of consumption, they have different ways in which they're already segregating out from consumption. A
Yeah.
lot of that waste or all items will go below deck, or they'll get further sorted by hand into their single commodities, or however what we've worked with them on, and their internal practices, what makes the most sense for it to be landed to shore. And then when we receive the products, for the most part, they're already broken down into whatever segments, and then we might further sort it depending on the streams. But they do an exceptional job on board to make sure that the least amount of possible is landed to shore, both from a space standpoint, because there's not a lot of space on board these ships, especially below deck. So they do a very good job on maximizing that, and also reducing the amount of impact that they have going into the different communities that they typically will call.
Yeah, I've been amazed. I've had the opportunity to get on the ships and go below deck, and I was absolutely blown away by the level and the degree of recycling the ships do. Like, they've got a separate container for bottle caps, metal bottle caps. They've got a separate container for lighters. Things that typically we might put into the landfill, hopefully not, but that might go there. But the degree in which they really work to recycle is quite amazing. I think some of the frustrating parts, I'm sure for you, is that if we were able, or put it this way, if some of our elected officials were to take up the offer of the cruise lines to actually get on the ships and see what they're doing, I think they'd have a real different perspective. But it's unfortunate. I know, as an organization, at cruise lines, we've made that offer time and time again, and I'm hoping at one time, our elected officials will take us up on that, because I think there's a lot to learn from actually getting on the ship and seeing what is done. So yeah, I hear you, what you're saying, in terms of that's probably a reason why some of that material is diverted away from landfill, or into recycling. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the misconceptions that are out there. There is misinformation that is shared by members of the community, and I think it's done almost as a scare tactic, whip up misinformation with regards to the work that you do. Yeah, how do you respond to that? And because I know you've been at the center of some of this, Steve, and how do you respond to some of the misinformation that's shared out there? And what is some of the misinformation that you've heard?
Well, I guess kind of taking a step back, and maybe there's a breakdown in communication from our standpoint. And I think that, we look at ourselves internally and we just say, okay, well, we got to do a better job continuing to educate.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important. A lot of effort goes into these different practices, whether it's through us or through other agencies, different recycling committees, which we're a part of. And even the cruise lines themselves, the amount of effort, they have teams dedicated to this, full divisions dedicated to this. And so we want to make sure that the right messaging goes out there, and that people see that stuff is being done, on average, or we are significantly better than the average consumer on the way that in which they're managing their day-to-day life on the stuff that they produce. Now, some of the I guess the misconceptions, or some of the rumors and stuff that are out there, I'm sure some of it is to get a certain message across, or to assist them on to other types of messaging. But again, it goes back to, what can we do to continue to encourage people to come on board, to come see the things that we're doing, and to see how we are doing it differently. We're not just saying this, like, we are doing it differently, and you can see the impact on the communities. It's significantly different than ports or other facilities around the world that don't manage waste like this, and some countries don't.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate to live where we live, and to be as strict as we are with a lot of our environmental regulations. And I know for myself, growing up, like, recycling has always been a big part of our day to day. It was what we were taught in school, from kindergarten up. which you don't see that in a lot of other nations. You're starting to see more and more of it. Over the years, I think it's kind of changed a little bit, because some commodities, it actually costs you more to recycle it than it does to just throw it away, which is what you'll see in some of these other nations. But we don't have that in Canada. We care more about the greater good. We care more about doing the right thing, which is why we'll still recycle it, and we'll still pay extra money for it. And the cruise lines will pay that extra money to recycle it because it's the right thing to do. They want to minimize the impact that they have in any community that they go into.
Okay. We'll come back to that in a sec, but I've got a question here for you that's come through the Q&A. And again, a reminder for folks to use the Q&A function if you'd like to ask Steve a question. And Steve, it's a question from Edward, and I'm just going to read it out. He says, I'm doing work on ship source waste, and this question may be outside of cruise ships. I have seen references to some rules of disposing of ballast water on land rather than outside of the 200 nautical mile limit. If this is in your wheelhouse, I'm trying to find out if that happens, and if so, how. Also, is that a reference to sediment in ballast tanks? So,
No.
okay.
Yeah, so ballast water is interesting. The reason why they want it done 200 nautical miles out, in case there's any kind of invasive species in that water.
Okay.
Typically, as the triple transit, they'll take ballast on to help balance the load of the ships. So if you're transiting between two different continents, for example, you might have different species in that water, bacteria, whatever it could be. What they're trying to do is minimize you coming into another port, a different part of the world, dumping your ballast out, and then somehow contaminating or endangering the native species that live in that area. So the reason why they want it far enough out, because they know that it won't impact the local port. We do take ballast water, typically because it's so expensive to do and it's in such large quantities, because it is quite a complicated process. We will only do it under emergencies, and typically vessels will only give it to us under emergencies. And I'm talking cargo vessels primarily. We'll never see it off cruise ships. The way in which we manage it is we'll bring all that stuff to shore, and then we'll take it to a water treatment facility for final process. So you can imagine it's a lot more expensive than just making sure you're 200 nautical miles out and discharging.
Okay, good. Edward, thanks for the question. And again, just a reminder for folks to use the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to get all your questions answered. Steve, let's go back to some of the urban myths regarding waste management. Again, one of the urban myths out there is that taxpayers' dollars are going towards managing the cruise waste on the terminal. Can you comment on that?
No, we don't receive any money from taxpayers. It would be nice, especially at a time like this when we have no cruise ships, but everything is directly with the cruise lines. Every item that we receive, we work with the cruise line, and they pay for all disposals of that item, and then they pay us to manage that portion for them on their behalf.
So here in Victoria, any of the waste that comes off the ships, it's very small. What percentage of waste that comes off the ships goes to the Heartland landfill?
If we're looking at overall volumes, probably about 10%, a little less than 10%. And again, it depends on the streamer, that call for the day, or what they might have on board. They might have some sort of specialized, they're doing a retrofit. So maybe we'll see a little bit more one time rather than other, because it could be like construction debris, for example, concrete. It's very difficult sometimes to dispose of some things depending on the port that you're in. Like Vancouver might manage that completely differently than Heartland or Victoria will. But I'd say 10% is kind of a good number. There's some ships that maybe less than 1% goes, because everything is segregated out, and they're not landing anything to shore other than recycling. You see that off some lines where it's 100% recycling. Now when we talk about segregation, we really get down into, and you kind of touched on this a little bit before, everything from separating the glass and the metal out from a glass drink. The lids will go in a separate container because it's metal. Glass will go in a separate one. Ceramics, we'll take ceramics off. So any kind of broken plates will be taken off separately. Lighters, butane lighters, we'll take those off separately and treat them in different pails. We have everything from food waste. Food is obviously, when you're on a cruise ship, when the buffets and everything else, it's a large item that they go through quite a bit of. We were the first ones to put it in before it was even mandated for organic. So back in 2010, we started a compost program with some of the cruise lines. We rolled it out as kind of a pilot project just to make sure it worked on board. because there can be complications when you're taking food and it's sitting for 7 days or 10 days, and then you're landing it to shore. So we wanted to make sure that it worked first, and it's worked exceptionally well as we've kind of refined the process over these last 10, 11 years. But food is a big item that we would receive tons of, literally tons of every single call, and typically we'll take stuff like that and it'll be sent and turned into dirt, for example, soil. So anything you can think of, we've typically found a way to make sure that we break it down into a different component and then only throw away the things that we absolutely have to. And when we can, we use waste energy facilities for that anyways.
Okay. Again, some of the urban myths that are out there, and I know created by a few of city councilors, is around the percentage of waste that Cruz makes up in terms of going to the Heartland landfill.
Yeah.
And I was surprised. It's in the single digits, isn't it? I mean, it's very, very low in terms of, I mean, I don't know if in your conversations with the CRD, have they shared with you what percentage of their landfill waste is coming from Cruz?
I don't remember off the top of my head. Our environmental team would know, and I can ask them and kind of circle back with you after this call.
Okay.
Because I don't want to just throw out a number. I
Yeah.
don't know off the top of my head, but it is single digit. It is quite low in comparison. And I think one of the things that, and maybe this will come up later on in the discussion, but the way in which cruise ships are charged as well for using these services, like a landfill, they're charged at a premium to be able to use that service. Quite a bit more than what the general public would use for that exact same amount. So in a way, depending on the port or depending on the community and how it's structured, in a way that a lot of it's done to subsidize the local community to make sure that they don't pay more for their services. Yeah. So they use other corporate bodies such as cruise ships or anyone else that requires this. They charge them more to make up for it. It's the same thing with airlines. Airlines are charged more to use the local landfills than the public is. Pretty much any kind of foreign entity that needs to use some sort of local service. Yeah. It's funny because airlines doesn't get much talk about at all, but very similar process.
So just on the number, and again, just a question that came in is, I think you just threw out there around 10%, but the question is that including, is that 10% of all waste, including liquid waste, or is it just solid waste only?
In our figures, we include everything because some of the things they might come off in a drum, and it could be things like oily rags. Well, we'll separate that oil out. The oil will go for processing. The rags will then be washed and treated separately as a fiber. So for us, just for numbers purposes, we include it on everything because we receive so many different types of waste streams. It's the only way we could do it.
Okay. So to be clear, and again, this is something that I think is really important to note, that the cruise lines are paying a premium more than what the average resident would be charged to use the Heartland landfill.
Typically for all services, anything. And the second that a lot of these facilities, they know it comes from a cruise line, they do charge a premium for it, which is, I guess, in a way, it's the way it needs to be. But
Okay. Got it. Okay, let's talk about the space that you've got out at the Breakwater District at Ogden Point. That's kind of your home base for Tymac in Victoria. It kind of works as a transfer station. It's relatively new. I think it's been going for about 2 or 3 years. What happens there that might be of interest to the community? And I know again that facility was a bit of a challenge with the community.
Yeah, and I think that's what's brought a lot of light to waste in relation to cruise in Victoria. Now again, Victoria's been receiving cruise ship waste since cruise first started calling in the early 2000s, so it's nothing new. What we've done, and I don't think it's a bad thing, because at least it's getting discussion around it, because I'm sure there's always ways in which all of us can always improve. But the reason why we put it and we wanted to have the facility right at Ogden Point is to reduce our traffic through the community, to reduce our impact on the community. So a lot of times when we receive a lot of these items, they are already they're in their own recycling stream. So all cardboards together, metals together, cooking oils together. But why we wanted the facility is to further consolidate it. So now we have single trailer moves, or just from a logistical and operational standpoint, single moves out of that community. So now we're moving a full trailer. Once we have a full trailer with a cardboard, a full trailer of cardboard leaves that facility to the end treatment or recycling facility. Really just in an effort to try and reduce the impact, whereas the previous organization was moving everything through the community as they received it. So sometimes it'd be a quarter of a trailer, they're still moving it through the community, which we don't want to do that.
Okay, so it's used as a way to kind of bring everything together. So you are working to try and reduce the amount of trips that you're making through the community and kind of pull everything together, correct?
Yeah, carbon, we really are making an effort to reduce our carbon footprint. We even went ahead last year before cruise was canceled. Good timing, I guess, on our part, is we purchased a whole new fleet of trucks. And typically all of our equipment is less than 5 years old. Last year, we replaced our whole fleet of tractor trailers as well. We bought all new roll-off trucks a couple of years prior to that. Biggest thing is, we want to stay up to date with all emission standards. We want to make sure that everything doesn't idle. And again, carbon footprints, it's really important to us. We are a Green Marine member, so we're always looking to continue to improve our status within Green Marine, which typically is some sort of self-improvement every single year, which does get audited. So in a way, it's a way for us to continue to improve, at least from that environmental standpoint, beyond what we're already doing.
Okay. Got a question here for you from Anki. I read that you do cradle to grave material tracking. Is that information available? It would be great for the community to hear where everything goes.
I think we've covered it before in a previous session, but I will check with our environmental team and see if we can just maybe publish a document to the GVHA, and you guys are more welcome to distribute it. Yeah, we can maybe cover some of the more popular items that people will relate to. So a lot of the metal or lights or those items, kind of what we receive and where it goes and what it gets turned into. I do actually have a little list in front of me if you wanted me to cover some of them now.
Yeah, maybe you can give us some examples if you've got that
Sure.
information available. That'd be great.
Yeah, so glass, obviously, on board a cruise ship, there's a lot of drinking that goes on typically.
So I've heard.
So yeah, allegedly. So we receive quite a bit of glass, and again, ceramics, so stuff from the dining room. So we'll take all of that and we'll haul it off to a facility where that stuff's turned into sandblast material, for example. Metal will be, smelted down, filtered out, and turned into many different metal products, steel, aluminum. Typically, anything that comes off, it'll be further sorted into any kind of precious, non-precious metals. Wood, for example, is turned into bark mulch, alternative fuels like biomass, horse bedding, and wood could be anything. It could be stuff on board just from regular construction. It could be props and displays from the theater shows that they're no longer needing because now they're changing up themes. So we'll receive all those items, we'll break it down, and then we'll send it off. Lights, they'll separate lights, glass, plastic, metal from the light itself. Actually, in fact, doing that, it's 96% more efficient to recycle, especially aluminum, in that light recycling process than it is to produce a new light. And we receive tons of lights. Same thing, we segregate those out all by type. So compact fluorescents by fluorescent tubes, or anything you can think of, halogens. We separate all those out. They're all treated separately and differently throughout the process. CFL tubes and fluorescent tubes, for example, have mercury in them. So we want to make sure stuff like that doesn't go to the landfill. It is separated out because obviously mercury, not only to us and our exposure, to the general public exposure is not good, but to the earth is really not good for the environment. Batteries, we'll recover a lot of the metal from the batteries in the recycling process. Cooking oil, grease traps. So typically that stuff will be turned into some sort of protein meal, which will then be turned into either a aquaculture food, so for fish, or for animals, livestock feed, or even pet food. Typically they'll turn a lot of that stuff into pet food. We launched a pilot project about 3 or 4 years ago now. Obviously we haven't had the last 2 years, but now we're recycling cigarette butts as well. And what they're turning, essentially we'll take all the butts, we'll send it off for recycling. They'll pull everything apart from the filter to the tobacco, and they're turning stuff like that into secondary market plastic materials. So benches, surfboards, stuff like that. Carpet, we'll recover all the nylon from carpet. Cardboard, paper, so any kind of packaging products that come on board the ships. So obviously you can separate out. The cellophane is treated separately than the cardboard or the paper or even the photos from they walk around, they take the photos on the ships. We'll recycle all that as well into other types of pulp paper products. Cascades is actually a very good example. They're one of our partners here throughout BC. They turn a lot of that stuff into used items that you'll see even at the Canucks games, for example. A lot of their paper and their hand towels and stuff is done through recycled products. And then electronics. So anything from broken casino equipment to computers on board, we'll break all that down and we'll separate the metal out from it, and the metal's treated separately from the rest of the items.
So that's amazing. So, but not all of this is done on the island, I would assume.
No,
right?
no.
Yeah.
So, and another reason for why we'll consolidate it, we'll move it to wherever we're able to best process it, or the best facility for it. So if it needs to move off island for final recycling, we move it off island for final recycling.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I think just as a follow-up, maybe if you could send that through to us, and then we'll make sure that gets put up on our website for people to take a look at.
Yeah, I'm making a note right now.
Okay. No, that's great, Steve. I mean, we've touched upon a little bit about this, but you just in the work you're doing with the cruise lines, what are they doing on board to help reduce waste coming ashore? I think we talked a little bit about that they're breaking everything down. I talked about the fact about how I'm seeing they take the coat hangers separately from bottle caps, from lighters. What other things are they doing on board the ship that might be of interest to people that they may not know is happening?
Well, that's where all the heavy lifting comes from, and kudos to the teams and the environmental teams. Not only does every single ship obviously have their own environmental team and then staff under them that helps them carry out any kind of environmental practice on board the ships. Yep. From a corporate standpoint, they have massive teams that not only will do essentially what we do, they'll sail with the vessel to make sure that they're continuing to be in compliance and continuing to follow all the internal SOPs. Operating procedures, as well as we will do the same thing, and they audit. We'll even have third parties come down and audit to make sure that practices are being followed. Again, it goes to, I think they've done a very good job just educating a lot of people on board. There are certain cruise lines that they do exactly that. They'll show on board, when you recycle this is what happens to that product. So they do a lot in terms of education as well.
Yeah, I know that on some of the cruises I've been on, they're actually, it's part of an optional tour that you can actually go down and see what is happening. And I think the lines are trying to really do what they can to communicate out the work they're doing to really, amp up the recycling that's happening. I've just got a question here. Another one that you apparently someone's also read about the work you're doing, that you're looking at future technology like waste to energy.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that, what that is and where it occurs?
Yeah, so we're looking at internally ourselves, looking at smaller methods of waste energy that we'd be able to implement ourselves. Obviously, it's incredibly expensive to go large scale in that type of technology. I know a study was done several years ago. I don't remember the exact year. I want to say early 2010s-ish, on putting a waste energy facility on the island. And it was deemed at the time, I believe, not to be feasible, or they didn't want to go ahead with it. Waste to energy is essentially the process of capturing energy from the waste that would otherwise go to a landfill and could not be recycled. So it goes into a process of high heat, which causes it to combust. What they do is they'll then capture all of the gases, methanes, everything else out of the air through scrubbers and other processes. They will then take that and use it as energy, which they will put back into the power grid. The remaining ash or residual from the products will be further filtered out. So if there's any kind of metals or anything in it, the metals and stuff will be pulled out and recycled. And then the remaining ash is typically turned into an asphalt or any type of road product. So of that, essentially nothing would find its way in the landfill. You do need quite a substantial volume in order for it to make sense, because you're always feeding it. So maybe if cruise was year round, it would make more sense in some other markets, some other communities. I would love to have it on the island. I think it's exceptional. It deals with a lot of the fears that some people might have with landfills running out of space.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, they might run out of space in 50, 100, 200 years, but it would just essentially eliminate that, because now you have, an asset that would last 60, 70 years on itself in one small footprint. There are some kind of portable technologies that are out there that we have looked at implementing, but of course they're quite cost prohibitive. So if we can find a way to do it, we are definitely going to do it, and roll it out to whatever community we're able to put it into.
So just on that, someone's writing, do you know if a CRD has any plans to install a waste to energy plant here on the island?
I believe it was a CRD that had conducted the study, or someone had
Yeah.
conducted it on behalf of the CRD all those years ago.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, there are no current plans or
Yeah.
future plans to implement one. Not to say that it can't happen, but at this stage, not as far as I'm aware. And typically, as we see with any kind of government or municipal project, it does take quite a long time from conception of idea to approvals to
Yeah.
development, environmental studies, and everything else we'll have to perform. So, timeline wise, it could be 2, 5, 10, 15, 30 years. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Someone's just writing here that this is good news, or possibly good news, that Esquimalt is actually looking at building one for the municipality. So maybe there's an opportunity there. And with the fact that the lines will pay a premium, the same thing could probably happen if Esquimalt were to build one. That may be a potential there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As we all look kind of past this current COVID, and we call it post-COVID, whatever that looks like, and possibly seeing a return of cruise in 2022. Can you tell us, I know you were, Steve, when Crew, in the 2019, our last season, you were doing a lot to kind of reach out to the community, to tell them, what you're doing down at the terminal. Can you tell us kind of post-COVID, what plans you've got to kind of reach out to the community? I know you
Yeah.
had talked about maybe at some point offering an opportunity for the community to recycle, to use the facility, to come on down and have a recycling day. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So what we've kind of been and again, it's going to be difficult. We'll see what the world kind of looks like post-COVID, and
Yeah.
making sure that it's safe and responsible to do so. But we want to have people down so they can kind of see the facility, see what we do.
Yeah.
And as well as let's do community days is one of the things that we're talking about as well. Are there particular waste streams that maybe people either don't know they can recycle or handle with responsibly versus just throwing it in the dump? Paint, for example, a lot of people think they can just throw away paint, or dump paint down the drain or whatever it may be. So we can have a large community day, and that's kind of one of the things that we're going to work with the GVHA on, is, and maybe we do these throughout the year, almost like a spring cleanup, fall event type situation, where we'll help divert and donate, and separate and treat a lot of these wastes, or recycling items with them and for them and on behalf of the whole community as a whole. Down at Ogden Point, we do have quite a bit of space there, especially outside of cruise season. So I think it's a perfect opportunity for us to work with the community and kind of just, again, continue the education, encourage, and I think it's a good thing for kids to see as well, and see that there are different ways in which you can manage it. Because obviously in school, we learn about the basics of recycling, but it doesn't really go into the details of what you can do with particular products and what you shouldn't do with particular products. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to continue to work with the community and continue to educate. But again, it'll just be depending on what the world looks like in this year, next year, or whenever we start to see some sort of resemblance of normal life.
Someone's doing the math, and so it's asking a question here. If 10% is sent to landfill, and I think you're saying it's most likely quite a bit lower than that, but that's the number. And someone said they're estimating that's about 2,000 tons a year. Does that mean you handle about 20,000 tons of waste a year? Is that about right? Or again, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Obviously, some items that we receive, metal, for example, it's very heavy.
Yeah.
We've received full large engine parts and stuff before, which might make up close to that just in metal alone. I know we're probably seeing a lot more in terms of tonnage than that a year. We maybe will see that in food waste. So I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it is quite a bit more than that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Interesting question. What are some of the most unique items that you've been able to divert from landfill?
We've seen everything, like everything. Everything from like full casino equipment to X-ray machines, which can be quite challenging because of the things that are inside the X-ray machine. So how do you manage those components and be able to transport something like that safely? Pretty much, if you can think it, we've probably seen it off a cruise ship, which is why anytime that we see an item for the first time, we make sure that we have a process in place for when we see that item in the future, if we receive that item in the future. And typically what we'll do is we have a little book that we send out prior to the start of every cruise season, that if regulations have changed, or if we found out a better way to recycle a particular product, that education goes out to the cruise lines as well. Our teams are always talking to make sure that everyone kind of knows what the most up-to-date regulations are for that province or that territory, because obviously it changes, and they're running 24/7, 365 in different ports around the world. So the way that they might be handling it in Australia might be a lot different than we're handling it in BC. So we always got to make sure that there's that education component, and that if there's things like X-ray machines, okay, well now this is the way in which we're going to manage that product. So going ahead, if you are going to be coming into our port, and this is going to be something that you are going to have to do out of necessity while calling our port, this is the way in which we need to manage it.
There's a question come in, and you and I were talking about this the other day, that when we look at kind of post-COVID, looking at some of the other things, new things that you might have to recycle, like PPE, have you started to think about that?
We have. So we're already putting a process in place for the items in which we think we're going to see the largest volume on. So a lot of it's going to be masks and gloves. I think are going to be our two largest commodities. We've already kind of set up a process for, depending on the type of mask, how we're going to manage that. We are going to be working with a partner for a lot of like N95 style masks where there is metal and stuff in it, on how we are going to receive it, transport it. They're going to pull everything apart, segregate all the metal from the nylon or whatever type of product is being used to construct the mask, fiber, whatever it may be, and recycle it that way. Same thing will go with different types of gloves, different types of PPE. The best we can do is have a general process in place on what we know the cruise lines, and working with the cruise lines on what type of stuff they're going to be providing on board to make sure that there's a safe resumption, and to continue with the safe resumption. One of the things that we never know is what people are going to bring on board that ship and then decide to throw away while on board that ship. So we'll see what other types of items we might receive in regards to PPE, but we are coming up with a pretty comprehensive plan on managing those streams when we start to see them. Next year after, whenever it may be.
Okay. We're just kind of getting into the final few minutes. Just another questions come in, but before I maybe get to the question, just chat a little bit about, if there was, one or two key pieces of information about recycling, waste management that you would want the community to know, what would they be, Steve?
In relation to what? Cruise,
just in terms of cruise, maybe it's again trying to dispel some of the the misinformation that's out there, and talking about the work that is being done from recycling to waste management. What would be some of the key takeaways you would want people to know about the work you're doing as it relates to cruise here in Victoria?
I think the easiest way for somebody to kind of understand what we're doing and the efforts that the cruise lines go to in order to make sure that it's safe and sustainable is to come and see it in person yourself. That is by far the best way to see it. To see the volume and the number of cardboard, for example, that we might receive. We might get 20 pallets of cardboard 6-7 feet tall from a single voyage off a single ship, like huge amounts, which typically, think of you and I, like, for the most part, we're pretty good. We'll segregate our own garbage at home, but some stuff might make it into the garbage. Nothing makes it to the garbage if it's cardboard, for example, off of cruise lines. But just to kind of see that stuff for yourself, it makes a big difference. And to see that there are dedicated teams that this is their job, this is their livelihood. We ourselves employ dedicated teams that their only job is environmental and waste management and recycling. That is their only job. So it's not something that we just kind of we do when the ships are in. We're doing it year round for all vessels that will call British Columbia.
Okay. We'll leave it with one last question. And that, are there items that come off the cruise ships that can be donated back into the community? I mean, maybe the natural question is around maybe beds or chairs or lost and found items. Can you talk about how the lines handle those kinds of things?
Yeah, so beds is one thing that we cannot do. We can recycle it. We cannot obviously just for sanitation purposes and everything else donate those. But we do receive a lot of large items which we do donate. Life jackets, for example, we donated to Firefighters Without Borders as one of our partners for any kind of life jackets. Flares, any kind of item that still would have some sort of life, we'll donate to organizations like that need supplies and resources. Anything from couches, workout equipment. We've done tons of exercise equipment. We've worked with the BC Back Institute. We've worked with Habitat for Humanity. Sometimes we'll have construction materials that they weren't consumed on board for whatever project. They land those fresh materials ashore, and we'll donate them. And Habitat for Humanity, for example, will then go and sell items like that to help raise money for their foundation. We've worked with the Kidney Foundation. Whatever item it is, we'll try and find the best avenue for it. On if we are going to be donating it, for example, can they use it? What things are they looking for? We've done blankets in the past for some less fortunate homeless organizations, things like that.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, I think these are kinds of some of the things that I don't think the average person really thinks about, and some of this information you've shared with me is again, just new information for me as well.
Well, COVID, for example, when COVID first hit, a lot of the facilities, so typically the way that the cruise lines work is they'll have different facilities throughout the world, which they will then send their provisions and their stores to in advance. No one obviously planned for COVID. So all the stuff on board the vessels, as well as in these freezers throughout the world, at least within our region, they had tons and tons of food. I'm talking anything you can imagine. So we worked with the cruise lines, and we had all that donated to local food banks to make sure that they had it. Obviously, the cruise lines don't eat it. They obviously didn't want it to go to waste. So a lot of that went to cruise lines. Again, it's what can we do to kind of support the community that we're in the best way possible.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. Steve, thank you so much. It's a great candid conversation. And again, if you've got any information, if anyone has any information for us or questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at gvha@gvha.ca. We'll certainly reach back to Steve and his team and get more information. Steve, thank you very much. Have a great balance of the day. And again, thanks to everyone for joining us on this conversation. Take care.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everybody.